Hello and welcome to SCLO Live. My name is Martin Crowson, and as ever, I'm joined by the MD of SCLO Consulting, Steve O'Hare. Welcome, Steve.
Morning, Martin. How are you today?
Very well. How are you? Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. It's May. I think it's May. It looks more like April outside at the minute. Every time we do these, it seems to be raining. So I think if farmers want any help of when not is a day to do any sort of ploughing or whatever, is just find out when we're doing these, and it'll be the day that's raining and they can't do stuff. So
We'll try and bring some joy to viewers in other ways. And on that note, thank you very much to everyone that's joining us today. If you're not already a subscriber of SCO Live, please hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell next to it will also inform you of any upcoming live broadcasts we have in the coming months. Today, we are always hoping to give you ways to improve your bidding. And there are many ways to do that across the sectors. Today, we're going to focus on 4 specific areas, which Steve is going to talk about and give you some valuable tips to help out your business. They are government procurement portals, analysing feedback and improving your tenders, beating the word count, and then responding to local authority tenders. So we'll start with the first one of those, Steve, and that is the government procurement portals. And I guess it's getting used to certain systems where that's concerned and being aware of what actually they need from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key things to remember is that, a portal isn't for life. A procurement portal is ultimately just a system. It's a system that whoever your buyer is, whether that be government organisations or private entities or bit larger private bodies, that will use some sort of system just to make their life a little bit easier. The benefit of a procurement portal is that it's there. It's a bit like the streamlined system we're using today. It's generally off the shelf. It enables people to publish documents, enables buyers to publish all the various different things that they would like organisations to see to be able to respond to tenders. And ultimately what they do is you can open them for a period of time, and then they cut down, and when it gets to a deadline, they cut off. So there's never any sort of doubt as to when things need to be done by and what needs to be completed. They've got lovely Q&A systems on there where you can go backwards and forwards with the buyer to find information out and request information. So what it does is just gets away from emails. You could just email stuff, but then ultimately you run the risk that it's getting lost in the email system. Or in the olden days when I first started doing this, you used to have to print tons and tons and tons of paper off and go and get it delivered. So I remember going back, 13, 14 years, and having to produce huge stacks of paper that you then either had to get a courier to go and take to the buyer, or you jumped in your car and you drove and delivered it, and they used to be huge. So they're a real useful tool to have. And I guess this morning's we always want to try and give top tips and information to help people. Is make sure you're up to date with these. I know within sort of like the core of my business, within the trading market, there's been a lot of change with people migrating from one system to another, and it's important when you are starting to use something different that you really get to grips with it and what it does and what its capabilities are and how things actually work. Because spending that extra 5-10 minutes at the start of a tender round will benefit you longer term, because ultimately you'll know and understand how it works. You'll be able to navigate things properly. You won't miss certain things, and you won't have a mad panic at the end when you realise that perhaps you should have clicked on something and you've answered all the bits that you need to do. So it's really, really important that you do that early doors and work through it.
I guess it's also important, Steve, in that regards, to make sure that you read it thoroughly when it's your turn to use it, and don't assume that last time was going to be exactly the same this time.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, there's a great example in the market. So a lot of organisations use a system called Bravo Solutions, which is really, really good, and one I actually quite liked. And that was bought by a company called Jagger. And they've made subtle changes over the last 6 months to how the system works. and how you can actually, where they keep stuff, how's things done, what it looks like, and even things like, things like that are really important. It's important just to, read the detail of how something works and making sure that you're opening things up. Central government are sort of moving towards their own systems as well. So, gov.uk type systems, which as a whole actually are pretty good. So, but you've got to understand how they work and take that time when you're bidding to actually go through it and click through it and click through all the various different bits and bobs. I think we did a segment of, well, not just the ROAP man, but actually the ROAP thing is a really good example of a new system where if you didn't work through it, there's certain things you could potentially miss, because ultimately if you didn't click certain bits to see what happened when you clicked it, it didn't open up sections that you needed to complete. So there's a danger if you didn't do that, you'd get to your deadline and then have a mad panic that you hadn't answered 2 or 3 questions or added in different bits of information because you hadn't done that process and hadn't got to grips with how it works.
Sure. Yeah. We'll move on now, Steve, to something where we're just talking about something there where you're looking back to try and make sure you don't make the same mistakes again. And I guess analysing feedback to be able to improve your tenders is another one of those where you're looking back almost to go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my big things is whenever you're not successful, or even if you are successful, it is always worthwhile getting feedback. Getting feedback is one of the fundamental building blocks about how you can improve tenders, how you can improve what you're doing, how you can get better at what you're doing. Feedback is always a little bit subjective, because ultimately, different people will read things in different ways, and whenever you've got a human element around things, you'll always get some degree of variation. However, there will always be something that an evaluator sees or doesn't see that you just need to make sure that you do your utmost best to address those issues. And a lot of the time, it's it comes down to that whole bit of making sure that you're answering the question. It's one of the things that we say repeatedly on our sort of messages and tips and all that. Like, biggest thing is answering the question and answering it in a way in which an evaluator can find the information quite easily. And a lot of that will come through in the feedback. For those that have been on, some of my training sessions, one of my big things that I talk about is the doing words in a question. So the biggest thing is within feedback is a lot of the time people don't answer how. They don't answer how they're going to do something. Give a nice big long list of your whats and your whens and your whos, but then they don't actually describe how something is done. So actually, what's your process for doing this? How do you go through this process to get to an end point? So that using that feedback will help you improve, in what you've done. And regardless of your market, whether it be training, whether it be healthcare, whether it be construction type activities, there's certain things that you'll always need to look at improving. There's fundamentally, if a buyer is buying something, they're kind of buying your product, so they're kind of buying the same thing time and time again. So the key thing is making sure that if you've not said something effectively once, that you don't say something not effectively again, and actually looking at how you can improve on those things going forward. And it will always be, it's subtle, unless you've got it horrifically wrong, and people do get it horrifically wrong now and again and just don't answer the question that they're asked. But sometimes it's just that subtle bit, particularly around the how. So how do you do things? How is this? How do you complete that? And it's always important to have that feedback every time that you win. So in an ideal world, you want to win and get feedback of what your tender was like and what the buyer liked about it. And then 9 times out of 10, they'll probably tell you the little bits that they didn't like as well, and tell you where you can sort of improve. If go back a couple of years ago, we did a lot of work around the T-level stuff with NCFE, and the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education were brilliant in terms of giving really robust, detailed feedback on what they liked and what they didn't like. Ultimately that helped NCFE be very successful in that whole T-levels arena in terms of winning quite a substantial amount of work to develop the T-level product, and that feedback was instrumental in that process.
We're all guilty in lots of walks of life of not wanting feedback if we failed, but the takeaway is make sure you do, because it will make you better the next time you do something.
Absolutely, and I'm just going to end just on that one point is, don't be too harsh on yourself. Feedback's great, but one of the key things is the baby in the bathwater, and we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Unless you've completely missed the point, there will be some good that you can take, and it's not a case of screwing up that piece of paper and starting again. Actually, there'll be certain things that you do well. You just need to make sure that you do more things well than you don't do well, and improve that time and time again as you go through that whole process.
Okay, one of the things that you've heard many a time, talking of where people have got it wrong, is not beating the word count. People not beating the word count. It's something that crops up time and time again. So just talk a little bit about just how important that is, and where people are going wrong, because there's a mistake you often make.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, most tenders come with some form of word, page, or character count associated to it, because ultimately, as a buyer, you don't want to read War and Peace volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the entire Encyclopedia Britannica to get to a point. You want to have something written in a clear and concise manner, and it's one of the biggest challenges that people have. So and I'm probably doing it now as I'm speaking,
Never.
Of getting to the point and answering the question. People want to take you on a little bit of a journey to get to the point that you've been asked, and you've got to be careful that you don't do that. And in terms of beating that word count and getting down to sizes, I think the fundamental thought process that we start with is actually, what is our word count, and what can we say in a certain number of words, or a certain amount of space. You've got to answer key points. So there's a few things of structure out your answer before you start. If you've got 5 key points that they want to see, and you've got 500 words, your obvious start point is 100 words per point. You don't want to make many more than that, because ultimately you'll end up answering one thing and not answering another. And again, if we go back to our previous point on feedback, that will be one of the things you see, is that people talk for hours and hours and pages about the thing they're really excited about, and then completely forget about the other point and give it 3 words. And so in theory, they've answered that question, but in reality, they've not answered it very well, because you've got far too much of one and not enough of the other. So you lose your balance in terms of what the evaluator is evaluating on. They're not just evaluating on one of the 5 points, you're evaluating on all 5. So if they can't see all 5 points, then that's one of the key things. So in terms of the sort of the things to take away, is that start at the end. If you've got 500 words, there is little or no point of writing 1,500 words, because it's going to take you 3 times as long to write. Then you're going to have to cut out 2/3 of what you've written to then get it to fit. And what I see quite a lot of the time when I review tenders is where people have tried to say too much, and what you end up with something is it's not English, and it's not even text speak, to be frank. It becomes really fractured, and it becomes a lot of staccato sentences that actually aren't in a coherent whole. They don't tell a story. They don't really say what the buyer is wanting to buy. So the real importance is start with a bit of what you're aiming for. That key thing is start with what you're aiming for and go from there. And if you're looking at different ways of doing things, there's different approaches and nuances and things that you can do. You know, one thing in a tender, as long as you're, you know, a buyer wants business English. You know, they don't want it to be a you know, an A-level English language assessment of, you know, all those various different bits. They don't want similarly, they don't want a university dissertation with cross-referencing left, right, centre. They just want you to answer the question in a way that's easy to understand. So, you know, it's, you know, you used to be you were a journalist for Leicester Mercury for years, and, you know, there were certain things that you had to work on the same sort of principles a little bit. You know, it had to be good English, but not necessarily the wordiest, longest way of doing it, because ultimately you had so many column inches you could fill. So it's exactly those same sort of principles of, you know, stick with what you can. You know, is 5 examples better than 3? Probably, but not when you've got a limited word count.
Yeah.
Just pick your 3 best out of the 5, and then actually you've then saved yourself 2, 3, 4, 5 words just by doing that. You know,
sometimes less is more, and that's part of the challenge, isn't it? To make sure that
absolutely, you know,
write succinctly and get over what you want to say in a shorter amount of space than maybe you'd like to go on about. Yeah,
exactly. So, you know, sometimes it's better to say one thing really, really well than 3 things badly.
Yeah.
And you know, that's one of the key components of that whole word count approach is, you know, start at the end and go from there. And you know, also, if you've got to understand the difference between words and characters, because, you know, characters is and sometimes, I mean, you see certain tenders that have you ask for one question in characters and one thing in words, right? You know, and you've just got to adapt and adjust to go through that. The big lottery are particularly good at doing that, of jumping between one and the other. And it's just a case of making sure that what you write fits with what, you know, what they want to have. So, you know, when you're using characters, you know, things like, yes, and when you learnt typing, you put 2 full stops after 2 spaces after a full stop. Business English, no, just use 1, because every time you press that space bar an extra time, that's an extra character. And if you think, I don't know, on a page, you get 40 lines on a page. Every time you press the space bar 1 time extra per line, you've got 40 characters that you've got to trim out, which actually is really straightforward. Just cut that bit. You know, it's not. It's that it becomes, you know, the simple bits that you can do to do that.
Okay, we've spoken about government procurement portals, Steve. What's the difference with local authority bidding? What to look out for?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting, and why I wanted to talk about this today is particularly with local authority stuff is the whole social value element. So the Social Value Act is something that was brought in to all sort of local authority level tenders a couple of years ago, but it's really starting to permeate its way through absolutely everything and anything, in terms of, you know, if you're going to deliver a service for a local authority in particular, is how do you add added value to the service that you do. And, you know, sometimes it could be quite straightforward. Actually, by delivering what you're doing, you're employing local people. I mean, that's really, really important. So there's a whole, you know, the whole agenda around localism. So actually, if you're working in, say, for instance, the London Borough of Camden, that you employ people that live in the London Borough of Camden, because ultimately they live there, and then they'll invest in their local area, and helps with the whole local bit. Or if you're a bigger business, you're training. You're doing training for your staff and upskilling your staff on a regular basis. You know, that's really, really important. Or, you know, you do some really good CSR stuff, so corporate social responsibility stuff, that you donate obsolete IT equipment to charities in the local area, or you you give advice to different groups. I did some stuff with a care provider, and that's stuff they did, is that their office equipment when they got rid of it, they gave it to disability charities to work with, you know, ultimately, which was their end service user. for them to go and use for sort of part of learning activities and all those different things. So all of those things are all part of social value. And that's something you've got to be aware of going forward with every single local authority tender that you see. There will be some element of social value within there.
Okay. Steve and SCLO Consulting will be delivering webinars on all of today's topics in association with AELP over the next few months, and we've just had the dates through for those. So you're doing the government procurement portals on the 20th of June, beating the word count on the 8th of July, analysing feedback and improving tenders on the 4th of August, and finally responding to the local authority tenders that we've just been speaking about on the 12th of October. If you'd like to find out any more information on those upcoming webinars, please follow our social media. You can also find out more at www.scloconsulting.co.uk or email Steve on the address which is on the bottom of the screen at the minute. Please follow our YouTube channel as well. If you want any more tips and hints on bidding for tenders, you'll find plenty of information and videos on that channel. So please have a look at that and check that out. And that just leaves me, Martin Croson, to say thanks a lot as ever, Steve, for your time today. And I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you again, Martin. Thank you for facilitating so wonderfully.
Thanks, mate. And all the best to everyone watching. Thanks once again for joining in, and we'll catch you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.